Hello! Happy, slightly belated New Year, and welcome to another Battle of Five Armies update. As always, since my last update, I've been busily amassing miniatures to add to the pile of shame, and even painting a few of them too, which I'm excited to show off at the end of this video. Not only have I been buying miniatures, but also some new terrain, and for the first time in a long time, it involved me giving actual money to Games Workshop. Many people have asked me about the Modular Hills, which came with my Battle of Five Armies box game, and which are used to represent the two spurs of the Lonely Mountain. These hills, or to give them their official name, the Citadel Modular Gaming Hill, were also available to buy from Games Workshop separately from around the mid-2000s before being discontinued around a decade later. It was an era of Games Workshop where they moved away from encouraging gamers to embrace their inner Blue Peter by hoarding and then smashing together loo rolls and lolly sticks with PVA glue, and instead started providing the much more profitable option of purchasable plastic terrain. I think the Modular Gaming Hill may have been the first, but it was one of several pieces at the time, and many more were to follow. And it's a real shame that Games Workshop stopped selling them, as they're a great looking and versatile piece of terrain. Despite having been on sale for such a long time, finding these hills on the used market today is surprisingly hard, and they seem quite sought after. Someone even commented on one of my videos specifically to ask if I wanted to sell mine. Obviously I declined, but I was curious to see what alternatives were out there, and honestly, there really isn't anything that compares. What I did stumble across, however, was that Games Workshop themselves had only a few months ago brought back a plastic scenery kit that was originally sold alongside the Citadel Modular Gaming Hill as part of their Old World range. Check it out. Now listed as Warhammer Hills, these were originally known as the Citadel Gaming Hill, and you can see how similar in style they are to the modular version. At £26 for a pair, they seem like an absolute bargain to me, especially for Games Workshop prices, so I decided to go ahead and order a set for myself. Despite being online only, you can opt to have them delivered to your local Games Workshop, or Warhammer store as they're now known, to avoid paying postage, which I did because I'm a tight bastard. Well, not only because of that, I also thought it would be nice to go and visit a Games Workshop or Warhammer store, I really hate that they changed the name, and come home with something I was excited about, just like the old days. My nearest shop, previously known as Games Workshop, is in the not at all beautiful or historic town of Stevenage. It's a town which was described by its greatest export, Sir Lewis Hamilton, as a slum, and its greatest accolade is that it's not as bad as the nearby crap town of Luton. This not Games Workshop is actually a relatively young store, having only popped up around a decade or so ago. It's quite small but otherwise seems quite pleasant. I don't visit it very often despite being in Stevenage a lot thanks to the big feck off Tesco there, but whenever I do, it's always a new person running it, which is a bit odd. This time it was a lovely friendly guy with a beard who promptly gave me the hills and sent me on my way. I stood there confused for a second because I'd braced myself for the barrage of small talk and upselling. As I left, I couldn't tell if I was relieved or actually slightly disappointed. Part of me always hopes that I'll get invited to try out a demo game of something, where we make the noises of the weapons and everything just needs a 4-up. Oh well, maybe next time. What was I supposed to be talking about? Oh yeah, the hills. Let's take a look at the hills. My first impression is that the box is absolutely huge, and more surprising is that the hills are actually stacked on top of each other inside, not side by side as I had assumed. Wow, I really do think these are great value at £26. Here they are with the Modular Hills, and as you can see they're very similar in size and design. When painted up and flocked in the same way, they should look fantastic together on the tabletop. So, let's get cracking with that, shall we? I started with a black undercoat and gathered a few cheap craft shop acrylic paints. First, I covered the whole hill in a watered down dark brown. This took a couple of coats. Once that was dry, I painted all of the exposed rocky areas with 2 coats of watered down mid-grey. Then I dry brushed the whole hill with an ochre colour, though the paint I'm using is described as amber. Finally, I dry brushed a slightly off-white onto the rocky areas. Everything looks very exaggerated at this stage, but we're about to blend everything together. I took the hills outside and dug out my old trusty tin of Army Painter Quick Shade Strong Tone. I bought this years ago, as you can probably tell from the rusty lid, but I never got on with it as a painting aid. For slapping on terrain, however, it's great. It's definitely an outdoor job though. It has a strong smell of fumes. That's because it also contains varnish, which again is great for terrain. Here's how it all looked the following day after the quick shade had dried. As you can see, it's done a great job of unifying the colours and making everything look a lot more natural, apart from the fact that it's super glossy. This can be solved with a matte varnish spray, but we'll do that at the end. First, we need to get flocking. I mixed up some PVA and water and slapped it over everything that wasn't exposed rock. Then, using an old sieve, I liberally covered the hill in Woodland Scenic's fine turf. Then I shook off the excess and left it to dry for a day. I mixed up some more PVA and water, with slightly more water this time, and with the help of a pipette, I soaked the flock to help seal it in. I also gave the hill a dusting of a different shade of flock to make it look a bit more varied and interesting. Well, it was meant to be a dusting, but I got a bit carried away and added more than I intended. Oh well. And after leaving that to dry and giving it a coat of matte varnish spray, it was done. And here they are. Yeah, I'm very happy with these, and I'm really glad Games Workshop have started selling them again. I'm sure there'll be many people who will see these early plastic terrain kits as symbolic of something being lost in the hobby, and I think that's totally fair. There's nothing like a beautifully handcrafted gaming table with foam hills and carved resin rivers, but for those of us who struggle to get good results when crafting, kits like this are really a godsend. I think at the time these were originally on sale, gaming tables did suddenly become a lot more homogeneous. The old inspirational tables in White Dwarf were replaced with the same few plastic kits, including the old plastic trees that I've never really been a fan of. This maybe peaked with the release of the Realm of Battle boards, where suddenly even the tabletop itself was a plastic kit. Speaking of which, have you seen the price of them on eBay recently? Good God. I think that's led to something of a revival of the old ways among gamers, with countless fantastic terrain crafting tutorials on YouTube. It's really great to see, and the hobby is all the better for it. But for those of us who need to be able to pack away their terrain in a box and not worry about it falling to bits, I think these hills and the old Modular Hills are absolutely perfect. They're generic enough to fit into any gaming system or scale, which is something that's definitely missing from the more modern Games Workshop kits, which are highly specific. So fingers crossed that they bring back the old Modular Hill too. Anyway, that's enough about hills. Let's get on to some miniatures. Last month I mentioned that I'd managed to buy a second set of the Battle of 5 Armies plastics, plus some extras. My next goal is to expand out the good army, so that I can take more themed armies, i.e. turning each of the 3 races into 3 separate forces. It even recommends doing this in the scenarios section of the book, where it commonly suggests taking all elf, dwarf or human armies, and occasionally even pitting them against each other. One scenario that caught my eye is called Swords in the Dark, which sees goblins ambushing an elf feast at night. It recommends 1,000 points of elves against a 1,000-point evil army. This seemed like it would be a good first scenario for me to try out, as it's a simple pitched battle, effectively, with the nighttime special rules actually simplifying things a little bit because of the limited visibility. But I'd need to expand the elf force quite a bit. Despite being the largest section of the good army, the elves included in the box game only come to 270 points. With the cavalry I'd added previously, I could get up to 350 points. Still a long way off. So it was time to paint up some more elf infantry. And after a couple of weeks of painting, here they are. Annoyingly, I couldn't remember exactly how I painted the first batch of elves, so the cloaks on these new ones seem a little different, but I'm probably the only person who'd notice. So with the elf infantry now doubled, I'm now up to 620 points. But in Warmaster systems, such as the Battle of 5 Armies, units can't act without orders, and with only Thranduil the Elven King at the helm, I'd need another character to lead this new brigade of units. And so, at long last, I turned to Copplestone Castings, and picked up their heroes and halflings. Inside this fantastic homage to the Fellowship of the Ring is a 10mm Legolas, aka Thranduil's son, and the perfect character to lead my new troops. The other characters in this set are going to come in very handy too, and I also picked up some other bits from Copplestone, so expect them to be popping up in future videos. But for now, let's get Legolas ready for the tabletop. First, there was a bit of flash and some mould lines to remove, which is always terrifying with models at this scale. Whilst doing this, I unfortunately noticed something that looked like a slight miscast on the miniature's face, so I did my best to fix it, but I was only partially successful. I figured I could make it less obvious with the paint job, so just cracked on. I then wanted to address the pose of the model, as it looks like he's shooting down at something below him. I figured I could put him on a scenic rock to give him a bit of elevation, and this would also help him stand out a little on the tabletop, which seemed appropriate. I started by experimenting with a small piece of slate, but in the end opted to use some cork, which I cut and picked at until it looked suitably rocky. I then covered it in modelling paste and tried to blend in Legolas's base. Once that was done, it was time to get painting. I kept things relatively simple by digging out most of the same paints I used for the infantry. I started with Strachan green for the cloak and tights. This is actually a different green than the one I used on the recently painted infantry, but the one I suspect I used first time around. I then painted his tunic Castellan green. Then the boots and bow were painted in Balor brown. The quiver, belt and clasp were painted with Mournfang brown. The arrow fletching was painted with Ulthuan grey. And the skin was painted with Cadian flesh tone. Ushabti bone was used for the hair, and the base was covered in watered down storm vermin fur. That was all the base coats done, so it was time for an all over wash of Agrak's Earthshade. Well, apart from the cloak, which I left alone for now. Here's how it looked after that was dry. Next, I used Athonian camo shade in the folds of the cloak. Then I painted the boots Avalan Sunset, trying to leave the Balor brown and wash in the darker areas. Then I used Lauren Forest to highlight the tunic. And Talon Sand to highlight the bow. And I highlighted the skin with Kislev flesh. I then went back over some of the areas of the cloak with Strachan green to tidy up areas where the wash had spread. Then, using Scrag brown, I highlighted the quiver and belt. Back to the cloak, I used Ogrin camo for the highlight. I then decided the tunic could use a bit more pop, and so added another highlight, this time using Strachan green. I then added a highlight of Iriel yellow to the boots. And painted the belt buckle and clasp with Liberator gold. And with that, I felt that the miniature was complete, apart from the base, which I finished off camera. So let's see how he looks with the rest of the elf army. Aside from the slight facial disfigurement, I'm really happy with how well this cobblestone miniature fits in with the official Games Workshop ones. I'm really looking forward to painting up more. And with Legolas added, the army is up to a nice round 700 points. In games I plan on using him with Bard's rules, as the archer themed rules seem most fitting. I could also give him a magic item to make him more effective in aiding units in close combat too, for a few more points. So despite a good chunk of progress, we're still a little way off the 1000 point target for the scenario. One option would be to drop the point size a bit, which would honestly probably be a good idea for my test game anyway. Another option would be to add allies to bring up the army a bit, for instance adding a unit of eagles for 70 points and Gandalf for 125 points, or better yet an elf mage, though I'm finding it hard to find a miniature I like for that one. I also do have 3 more units of archers unpainted, although really more spearmen is what I'd really need, as ranged weapons aren't intended to be particularly effective in Warmaster apparently. Another thing I'm considering is adding custom units to the army. For instance, the dwarves are the elite units of the good army, costing 110 points per unit to the elf spearmen's 50 points. I think adding a more elite and better armoured elf unit to the list could be a good option, either by proxying the dwarves or by creating a custom profile. For now, I think I'll try the scenario with a smaller points value. 700 points seems like a good number in all honesty. Going forward, however, I'll definitely be considering all the other options, but all that will have to wait for future videos. If you have any thoughts or ideas on some custom elf units or characters, I'd love to hear them in the comments below. Thanks so much for joining me in this journey into 10mm Middle-earth. I hope you enjoyed this update, and I really hope to see you in the next video. Next month I'll be taking part in an exciting collaboration with some other 10mm Middle-earth YouTubers, so look out for that. And I'll do my best to get something resembling a battle report out soon. Take care, and thanks for watching.